Imagine for a second that you could just, I don't know, hit a giant reset button on human history.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, right. Like, what if everything you thought you knew about the origins of civilization, human biology, and even the very first concepts of spirituality was completely backward?
That is a massive premise.
It is. And welcome to today's deep dive into a really, really thought-provoking stack of sources. We are centering our discussion today around some excerpts from a groundbreaking and honestly highly provocative book.
Right.
It's called The Return of the Great Cosmic Mother: Biology, Culture, Spirit by Monica Sharrow and Barbara Moore.
A very heavy hitter.
Exactly. And our mission today is to unpack their core radical thesis: the idea that the absolute earliest human cultures were female-centered, biologically grounded, and spiritually integrated.
And that the patriarchy we see today is actually a relatively late historical rupture.
Yes. But before we jump into the deep end of these historical and anthropological claims, we should probably set some ground rules for this journey.
Yeah, I think that's really important because this text tackles deeply rooted historical, religious, and political concepts.
Very stuff.
Very heavy. It includes intense critiques of traditional patriarchal religion, as well as, critiques of Marxist materialism.
Right.
So we are just here as your guides to explore what these authors argue. We're impartially laying out their evidence. We aren't endorsing any specific political or religious viewpoints today.
Nope, just presenting the fascinating ideas contained in these sources so you can examine them for yourselves.
Exactly. So how are we tackling this?
We have quite the roadmap for you today. First, we're going to look at some startling biological arguments the authors make.
The biology stuff is wild.
It really is. Then, we're going to travel back in time about 30,000 years into the archaeological history of early humans.
Okay.
And finally, we'll explore exactly how and why this patriarchal break occurred and what it means for the world you navigate today.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the biology.
Let's do it.
The text builds its foundation on an assertion that might, frankly, challenge what you learned in high school science.
Oh, definitely.
According to the authors, life began in a female oceanic environment, and they point out that all mammalian embryos—
They all begin anatomically female.
yes, all of them. Male development actually requires a secondary hormonal induction later on in the gestation process.
Right. So the baseline mammalian blueprint, according to this biological framework, is entirely female.
Which is just a crazy way to reframe it.
It is. And the authors point to another fascinating physiological reality that honestly often gets overlooked in typical evolutionary discussions.
Right, the homologous structure.
Exactly. The clitoris and the penis originate from the exact same embryonic tissue. They are biologically homologous structures.
Which makes sense when you think about that female baseline.
What's fascinating here is how the authors take this biological reality and connect it to the evolutionary timeline of humanity, specifically regarding human sexuality and the actual dawn of our species.
Yeah, because the evolution of continuous sexuality is where the authors make a massive leap.
A really profound leap.
The text points out that human females uniquely evolved a system of continuous sexuality, breaking free from being strictly bound to estrus.
What we commonly call being in heat.
Right, being in heat. Because estrus dictates the sexual behavior of almost all other mammals, tying intimacy exclusively to a really narrow window of reproduction.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this biological shift in the female body is what the authors argue initiated hominization.
The literal making of humanity.
Yes. Think about the profound implications of this biological change. If sexual intimacy is no longer purely dictated by a rigid biological clock demanding reproduction.
Its function transforms entirely.
Exactly. It ceases to be just a mechanical means for a species to propagate itself.
I want to pause on that because it seems like the absolute crux of their entire anthropological argument.
It really is.
Are the authors saying that because early human females could engage in intimacy outside of a strict reproductive mandate, they essentially invented human social bonding?
That is precisely what they're arguing.
Wow.
Right? The text suggests that because early humans could bond outside of just the biological imperative to reproduce, intimacy became emotional.
It became relational.
Relational, social, and eventually symbolic and spiritual. Untethering sex from mere survival allowed for tighter, more complex social webs to form.
So they're fundamentally arguing that this specific biological shift in the female body is precisely what made humans unlike any other species on the planet.
Our biology dictated our earliest cultural and spiritual frameworks.
That is so interesting.
Yeah, the freedom from estrus meant female humans had autonomy over their bodies and their social connections. This autonomy fostered the first true communities.
Which were centered around mothers and their offspring.
Exactly. And this biological foundation perfectly sets the stage for what we find when we look at the earliest physical evidence of human culture.
Okay, so let's follow that thread right into the archaeological record.
Let's get into the time machine.
Going way, way back, about 30,000 years into the Paleolithic era.
A massive stretch of time.
Right. And according to the text, for that entire stretch, the deity imagery found by archaeologists was overwhelmingly female.
Almost exclusively.
The first god in human consciousness was not a male figure in the sky, but a female figure. We are talking about the famous Venus figurines.
Like the Venus of Willendorf.
Yes, with their highly exaggerated reproductive features.
And the symbolism surrounding this early belief system was incredibly unified. It was deeply tied to the natural world.
How so?
Well, the authors detail how early humans viewed their entire environment through the lens of the female body. Caves weren't just convenient shelters from the rain or whatever.
Right.
They were perceived as the literal womb of the earth. The earth itself was the ultimate mother, a living, breathing organism that birthed all life and eventually took all life back into herself.
And the connection to the cosmos was just as literal for them.
Very literal.
The text points out how early humans connected moon cycles, which operate on roughly a 28-day loop to human menstrual cycles.
Which also operate on that same loop.
Exactly. And blood wasn't seen as something associated with violence or injury or death, like how we often code it in modern times.
It was viewed as the ultimate life force.
Right. The magic of a body that could bleed continuously without dying and then produce new life. That was the absolute center of their cosmological understanding.
And the authors stress this isn't just some mythic utopian fantasy concocted by modern thinkers.
No, they ground this argument in structural anthropology.
The first human cultures formed around women's inner circles, and the artifacts we actually dig up reflect a society structured by female biological rhythms.
Like the bone carvings.
Yes. When we look at artifacts like early bone carvings with sequential notches, the authors argue these weren't just random tallies.
Right. They were early lunar calendars inextricably linked to tracking menstrual cycles.
Quite badly.
And those women's circles weren't just sitting around marveling at the moon either.
Definitely not.
The text details how they were the actual engines of early human innovation. These cooperative groups were responsible for child-rearing, gathering the vast majority of the community's food, innovating early tools.
They created the first rituals to honor the cycles of life.
And they discovered early medicine by painstakingly identifying which plants healed and which ones harmed.
The text actually goes even further, arguing these same women's circles likely initiated agriculture itself.
Which completely flips the standard narrative.
It really does. Generations of women observing plant life cycles, understanding seeds, and domesticating crops while gathering food laid the very foundation of settled civilization.
So early communal systems, based on this archaeological and anthropological evidence, were highly cooperative and matrifocal.
The focus of the community was on the maternal lines, female-led innovation, and a deeply held reverence for the natural world as a mother figure.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting.
I know where you're going with this.
Let's play devil's advocate for a second. If human society was this stable, cooperative, matrifocal structure for 30,000 years, with a completely integrated view of nature and biology, what on earth caused it to collapse?
The big question.
How did a patriarchal rupture of this magnitude even manage to take hold and completely rewrite human consciousness?
The authors identify this massive tectonic shift as the patriarchal break.
The patriarchal...
According to the text, the dawn of patriarchy wasn't the origin of civilization, as it is so often taught in schools.
Right.
It was a late historical rupture that introduced a brand new, highly destructive concept to humanity: dualism.
Dualism, being the splitting of the world into opposing forces.
Exactly.
The pitting of spirit against matter, light against dark, mind against body, man against nature.
Because before this break, everything was integrated in the human worldview. The earth was sacred, the body was sacred, and physical labor was a sacred act.
It was all one thing.
It was all one. But with the patriarchal break, the authors argue we see the sudden rise of male sky god supremacy.
God was no longer the earth beneath your feet or the cycles of the seasons.
No, God was a distant, transcendent, detached figure up in the sky. Earth, matter, and the physical body were suddenly demoted.
They were seen as lesser.
Lesser, flawed, or even inherently sinful.
And if the physical body and matter are suddenly viewed as lesser than the pure, detached spirit in the sky, female biology, which had been the center of human spirituality for 30,000 years, becomes a massive threat to this new hierarchy.
A huge threat.
This directly fuels the violent repression of female sexuality, which the authors spend a significant amount of time analyzing.
And this raises a really important question. Why was female sexuality specifically targeted with such extreme systemic repression?
Right. Why that specifically?
The text argues it ties directly back to our earlier discussion on the evolution of continuous sexuality.
Oh, okay.
Female sexuality was inherently autonomous and non-reproductive. It didn't exist solely to serve a male-dominated reproductive pipeline.
And the authors point specifically to the clitoris to illustrate this. They highlight it as an organ that exists solely for pleasure, serving no direct reproductive function.
Right.
In the context of a shifting patriarchal power dynamic, this organ came to symbolize female independence from male-defined reproduction.
It was physical, biological proof of a sexuality that existed entirely outside the bounds of producing heirs for a patriarchal lineage.
Or passing down hoarded wealth.
Exactly. The deep systemic repression of the female body began there. And the authors point out how this break didn't just affect gender dynamics, it fractured the entirety of the human experience.
Production was violently separated from ritual.
Science was separated from sacredness.
Institutional religion emerged, but it became strictly aligned with power hierarchies, state control, and the domination of nature.
Rather than communal ecological integration.
Which perfectly frames the author's critique of the modern ideological spectrum.
They really do not hold back.
No, they take aim at the extremes on both sides of modern thought. On one hand, they heavily criticize traditional patriarchal religion, arguing that it functions primarily as a tool of domination.
It hoards the concept of spirit at the top of a male hierarchy. Priests, bishops, popes.
And uses it to control both nature and women.
But they levy an equally heavy critique against Marxist materialism.
Right.
The authors argue that while Marxism correctly identifies the mechanisms of economic exploitation and the alienation of the worker, it completely denies the spirit.
It reduces humanity, nature, and existence purely to economics, matter, and industrial output. Let's put this into a modern context. It's like how today you clock into a soul-crushing spreadsheet job for 40 hours a week, completely alienated from the value of your labor.
Yeah.
And then you desperately try to cram all your meaning and spirituality into a 45-minute yoga class on a Saturday morning.
That is a painfully accurate analogy.
The authors are saying early humans didn't live with that kind of split. Early communal lives wasn't just a prehistoric Marxist utopia focused strictly on resource distribution.
It was profoundly and spiritually integrated. The ritual of honoring the earth and the physical labor of gathering food were one and the same. The authors are making a highly nuanced point here about the trajectory of human history. The problem throughout the ages wasn't spirit or spirituality itself.
It was the hierarchical appropriation of spirit.
When the concept of the divine was ripped away from the earth, detached from the female body, and hoarded by a ruling class of kings and priests to justify their power, that is when the fundamental damage to human consciousness occurred.
So according to this text, how do we begin to fix a fracture that runs thousands of years deep? What is their path forward for true liberation?
The authors lay out some incredibly heavy systemic requirements.
Okay.
They say humanity must fundamentally reunite the body and the cosmos. We have to reunite labor and ritual.
Bridge sexuality and sacredness again.
And perhaps most pressingly for the existential crises we face today, we have to reunite ecology and economy.
It's a massive call for total integration. But it is vital to recognize that the authors are not calling for a regression to a romanticized primitive past.
No, not at all. The integration they demand requires moving forward with a completely transformed understanding of our relationship to the planet.
Right. It's vital to recognize that the Great Mother archetype detailed here isn't just a purely benevolent, nurturing figure passively baking cookies for humanity.
Definitely not.
We aren't talking about a gentle, sanitized version of Mother Nature.
The text describes her as an archetype and a profound ontology, and the authors use the term ontology here to mean that the Great Mother isn't just a metaphor or a symbol to these early humans.
She was the literal nature of being.
She was reality. She is the earth organism. She is the biological matrix and the cyclical timekeeper. Nature is not just a gentle spring day.
No.
She is the principle of death and rebirth. The Great Mother is total. She is destructive as well as creative.
She represents the hurricane, the plague, and the earthquake just as much as she represents the spring harvest. It's a completely different way of viewing divinity and existence. It's not about praying to a perfectly benevolent, detached being to grant your wishes or save you from the physical world.
Exactly.
It's about acknowledging, respecting, and integrating the absolute, terrifying, and beautiful totality of nature and biological existence.
This brings us to the ultimate structural implications of everything we've unpacked from the source material today. I really want to ask you, the listener, what stands out to you?
Yeah, think about it.
If the authors are right, and the absolute first God image in human consciousness was female, built on a matrifocal, biologically integrated society that thrived for 30,000 years, that profoundly changes our understanding of human nature.
It changes the entire narrative of human inevitability. It means the male god, the patriarchal structure, the hoarding of wealth, the domination of the earth, all of it is historically emergent.
It means it showed up incredibly late to the party. It proved that patriarchy is not eternal. It hasn't always been this way.
Right.
It means dualism. This
Yeah.
constant exhausting war between spirit and body, humanity and nature, is not an inherent human trait.
Most importantly, it implies that the suppression of women and the exploitation of the environment are political constructs, not biological imperatives. And if these systems are political constructs that were built over time, they are reversible.
Yes.
That is the massive takeaway here. The structures of domination we live under today were artificially constructed, which means they can be dismantled, transformed, or entirely reimagined.
So what does this all mean?
For you listening right now, navigating a world dealing with severe climate crises, rampant economic burnout, and deep societal divides, understanding the arguments in the return of the great cosmic mother provides a radically different lens.
It really does.
It invites you to view modern structures of power, religion, and even your own physical biology through a completely new framework. It asks how we might integrate the cold, hard facts of modern science with the profound, grounding meaning of myth today, without collapsing into rigid religious literalism.
Right.
How do we start treating the earth not as a dead resource to be mined for quarterly profits, but as a living, breathing system that we are fundamentally a part of?
It really is a massive paradigm shift.
Yeah.
And it leaves us with a fascinating, lingering question to ponder as we look toward the future.
What's that?
Well, if we follow the author's logic that the earliest forms of human spirituality, social bonding, and societal structure were deeply rooted in the biological realities of the human body, specifically female reproductive biology and lunar cycles, what happens next?
Oh, that is a good question.
We are entering an era of unprecedented technological intervention in human biology. How might future leaps, like the development of artificial wombs, radical life extension, or brain-computer interfaces, sever or permanently alter that ancient biological anchor?
Wow.
If our bodies change that drastically, will we be forced to entirely rewrite our concepts of divinity, gender, and the sacred all over again?
Wow. If biology shaped our first gods, what gods will our new biology create? That is an incredible thought to leave on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. We hope this exploration into the origins of culture, biology, and spirit has given you a massive amount to think about.
Definitely.
Keep questioning the foundations of the world around you, keep exploring those hidden histories, and we will catch you on the next one.